Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second day of the course. For today, what I want to do is I want to do a quick review of what we talked about in the last class, and I wanted to set up your IntelliJ so that you can actually start coding like by yourselves and like on an actual thing. So yeah, okay, so we're going to start with a quick review, and then we'll start talking about how to actually use IntelliJ and how to use it to create programs. So if you remember from last time, the let me open up a whiteboard. Okay, so if you remember from last time, the key concepts we talked about, specifically relating to code, because the concepts and stuff, I already put a short writing about it on the classroom. But the actual code stuff, we talked about essentially the three important parts of a program, which is the input, the operations, and then the output. Essentially, for any program, it needs to have some sort of user input so that it knows what to do, whether it's clicking a button or typing in your name or or typing in something else, or simply pressing here on keyboard. It needs to have some sort of user input in order to actually begin doing whatever it's supposed to be doing. And the operations is where it takes the user input and then runs through various calculations or simply just checks what the input is in order to know what to do with that input. And finally, output is when it takes whatever the data, where it essentially takes the data that the input creates and outputs it. For right now, the basic ways of doing this are using Scanner to gather inputs from a user. And Scanner is specifically for typing, where when you use Scanner, what happens is essentially in the IDE, it'll create like a box, and then if everything you type in the box will be sent to the scanner, and each one you type is essentially put in like a list format, and then every time, and in order to actually get out these inputs, you use a command called the scanner. You have to take the scanner name, and then write the command .next after it. And what that simply does, it takes the first element in the list. It takes the first item in that list, or in other words, the first thing you typed out into the program. And then it'll take that and then put it in whatever area you assigned it. Essentially, this is like a mini program. It takes in input, which is you typing, and then its output is simply taking whatever you typed, translating it into something that the code can use, and then putting it and outputting it into whatever variable you want to put it in. For operations, what we learned last time was basic math operations, such as the addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. And it's fairly self-explanatory. If you put two numbers together along with an operator sign, then the program will run through the numbers and the operator sign and then figure out whatever the correct number is. We also learned about the modulus sign, which is supposed to find out remainders. If you take two numbers, it's essentially division, but instead of giving you the division result, it gives you what would be the remainder. Now, you can also use the math symbols on not just numbers, but on words as well. In Java, the way it handles this is it simply combines the words together. So if you had a word, and you put a plus sign next to, say, the word string, then this would our Java would simply output a single word that simply says that's one word that says word string. It will not add spaces. So if you want spaces, you'll have to manually add spaces, like for example, this space right here. And finally, for output, we talked about this command right here, system dot out dot print. And essentially, this simply tells the computer that in this system, go to the output area and then print out something. So to recap, the most important parts that we learned yesterday, the part about actually building a program comes from these three steps. For any program, you have input, or usually this is usually user input, Also, in certain cases, it can actually be like input from a different program that will like the output of one program can become the input for a different one. So like just doing multiple math operations. So after you get data, you need to do operation. You go on to the operation step. And what then this step, like I said before, is essentially taking the user input data and then like depending on whatever the data is, do whatever the program is supposed to do. Like if the user inputs numbers, and the program might add the numbers together. Or if the user, for example, like did a left click, then click on whatever the user was pointing at. And finally, the third step is output, which is simply take whatever the user did, and then after you ran it through operations, you need to somehow notify the user, whether it's by showing like a symbol or simply outputting the data that was supposed to do. And the ways we accomplish this is by using scanner, which takes in inputs from a user through typing on the keyboard, and you can use math operations in order to manipulate data, and we use system.out.print in order to actually print data. Now, in order to actually kind of practice by ourselves, we're going to set up the IntelliJs I told you guys to download. So, or to do that, I'm going to. So if it's possible, so if everyone can everyone open your IntelliJ, and so this is what it should basically look like. Except most of you probably won't have any of this on the left side. This is simply what pops up after you've created projects that you can work on. But since most of you haven't actually made any coding projects, this probably will be empty. So after you open it, it should look like this. Please message me when you finish like opening it. And if it looks different from this screen, also tell me.
Mine is a different version.
A different version?
Yeah, mine's is, I'm pretty sure it's mine's is 2022.1.2.
Pretty sure it'll be fine. I don't think if anything, that just means it'll have more features and stuff that I don't, but like the basic format should be fine. Yeah. So is everyone at this screen? You can just message me in the chat if you don't want to talk about that. But I need to know if everyone is here. Okay, well, is anyone not here? Okay, let's see. All right, I think that's everyone. All right, so after here, you want to click create new project, which should bring you to a screen that looks like this. If at any point this does not look like what you're looking at, please tell me, because that's not good. But yeah, it should look like this. And while you can, and like once you get to know more, you can edit some of this. Most of this is not really needed for what we're doing right now. So after you get this frame, just simply click next. Don't choose any additional libraries. Don't need to care about anything. Just go to next. You don't need to worry about anything on this screen either. So this is also next. Finally, give your project a name up here, whatever name you want. And your name is fine. And then just click finish. And then it will create a new window, which should look like this. Is everyone with me so far? Is everyone with me so far? All right, cool. So after you get here, you're going to want to click this project on the side. Open up the first folder here. Go to this blue folder. Don't click on it though. Go to this folder here, right click it, and click new. And then you want to create a new Java class. and give it whatever, and then we're going to name this one beginner program. All right, so as you can see, what we just did was we created a program. Or more specifically in Java, these are called classes, which are essentially just basically one of the names for coding segments. And so in order to actually start coding, you need to have, first of all, you need to have this outer shell. And this just tells the program, this is a class that is public, meaning anyone that can, no matter where you are, anyone can essentially see it. And that means the computer can run it at any time. It's this public class, which basically means this is about to be a Java code domain. This is the name of the program. In order to make it a runnable program, or a program that we can actually run, we need to add this piece of code right here. There's a shortcut to write it, where you simply write PSVM, and that will also auto write it. Yeah. This is basically just saying anyone can run this. This static just basically means every copy of Beginner program will only have one of these, and void just means that this void means right now there's not going to be output, and main means this is runnable. You don't really need to care about all this. This is mostly just like this doesn't matter too much. It's just here to it's just like the skeleton. And it will never change. It will always look something like this. So anyway, once we're actually here, we can use what we learned yesterday. If you wanted to write a program that let's say gets two people's ages and then returns their average, you would need, there are three parts. You need to first have some way for the user to enter their name, the age, some way to calculate the average, and then some way to output the average. And like I said yesterday, in order to do that, we're going to use the scanner, math, and then the system.out.print. Scanner is used for inputs. And so in order to use scanner, we have to create a scanner object. And what this basically means is that we're telling Java that right here, we're essentially saying, I created a variable, SC. Variables are, you can think of them as like algebra variables where they hold a value, or you can think of them as like buckets essentially. And here we're saying that we have a bucket called SC, and this bucket holds scanners, and we put a new scanner inside this bucket. And this scanner is special because it's going to scan system.in. So essentially we're saying this bucket SC holds scanners, or in other words, this SC holds everything that has a type of scanner, and we create a new scanner to put inside the SC object, and this scanner is going to connect to system.in. Now, in order to actually, so now we have a scanner object. In order to actually get input from the scanner object, we have to use methods, and essentially objects like scanner have essentially already have code inside them, so that way you don't have to recode them. And the scanner class has a special method that's called .next. So first of all, we need a container to store the variable, to store the age so that we don't forget it. So into H1, for example. And in order to get data, we need to take the scanner, take the bucket, and tell the bucket, I want your next in. And what this does is essentially, and what this code essentially says is that this scanner object is going to look for whatever the user put as, whatever the number the user put down. And it's going to output that number. And then it's going to put that output number into this age bucket. And if we want the second age, we simply repeat this process. This doesn't give the same number because it's already gotten a number. Essentially, you can think of the user input as like a list, where this will go to the first item in the list and then check it off. And then this will go to the first item in the list. But since it's already been checked off, it goes to the next one. So this will give us two different numbers. Finally, in order to find our average, we simply can use basic math, where the average is both ages. Divided by the total number of ages. Now, if you remember correctly from last time, I talked about how this int tells us that this bucket, age 1, can only hold integers. This is a bucket strictly for integers. When I write int average, this is saying I have a bucket called average, and you can store integers in it. You can store ints in it. However, this number might not always be an integer. If it has decimals, then it would no longer be an integer. It would be a rational number. So what that means is when this calculates out, and if it gives us a decimal, like say you have 3 plus 5, and then let's say you have 1 plus 4, gives you 5, and 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. But because this can only hold integers, it'll round down to just 2. And so this bucket average will not hold the decimal 2.5, it will hold the integer 2. If you do want the decimal, then you'll have to change the bucket. The bucket, you have to tell the bucket, you don't hold integers, you hold doubles. And at the same time, you also have to change these to doubles as well, because when the program does math, it only looks at the type of the buckets. So it sees, oh, you're taking an int, and then you're dividing it by another int. So you must want an int instead. At least one of these has to be a double. And so we can do that by simply just changing this 2 to a double. Because as a decimal now, this 2 no longer classified as an int, it's now classified as a decimal number. And now that we have the average, we can go on to the last step, which is output. And we can simply tell the program to return an output and say, your average age is like I said before. So first of all, since I'm about permanent, simply tells the program that in the program, I want you to write out then whatever is inside these parentheses. Yesterday we talked about how in order to write words, you have to use quotation marks. Essentially, like in normal writing, where if you want to signify someone is talking, you use quotation marks. In this case, the program is talking. So just use quotation marks to tell the program that this is talking stuff. So you type whatever you want in here. And then you can use, and again, like I said, you can use mathematical operators on words and phrases. And the way it works is essentially it just adds whatever the following object is to the end. And while this is not technically a word, this is a number. Java will automatically convert anything that's not a string to a string if it's able to. So if it's a number, it'll simply convert that into the relevant string, which is simply just a number. So if you were to run this program, you can do that by right-clicking and clicking the run your program here. Notice this box pops up. And this box here will allow you to get user input. So in this case, we want 2 numbers, right? So you can simply type in 2 ages here. Let's say 10 and 15. And then it will and then in the same box, I'll also take out the output. So to the program, it first runs this code and creates a scanner bucket and puts a new scanner inside the bucket. Then it gets to here and stops, because in order to run this, it needs a user input, and since there's no input here, it waits. But as soon as we type in 10, this code is able to run. So it sees, oh, the list of inputs now has something in it. So it takes the first item in that list, puts in age 1, and then removes that item from that list. Then it gets this piece of code and stops, because now the list of user input is empty. So now it needs to wait for the next input. And when we type in 15, the list is no longer empty. So it takes in that input, puts it in this bucket, age 2, and then it deletes the input from the list. And then finally, it does simple math here, and then puts the results of this math into this bucket, and then simply outputs it here. Another way you could output it is by separating into two separate print line statements. So you can simply do this. You could separate this into two print statements. You want to do if you want to do multiple output, you can also just print it out like that. And that will still give this, and I can still give you the same answer. See, someone asked how to automatically see how many ints there are and then find the average from that. If you want to, okay, so let's say you don't know how many people there are and you want, let's say there could be 100 people and you want to calculate their average age. So firstly, this will no longer work. In order to, if we don't know how many people there are, because in this example, this works because we know there are exactly 2 people, so we need only 2 buckets. However, the question someone asked is, what happens if we don't know how many there are? So what we can do is, okay, so in order to, okay, so in answer the question, we have to do some more stuff. So I guess, so yeah, we're gonna have to introduce this a bit earlier. So today, some new stuff we're going to learn about is essentially ways to make this operation and this input smoother. To do that, we're going to talk about loops and if statements. Essentially, in order to do more complicated operations, we need to have some way of essentially identify things. And to that end, there is this group of statements called if statements. And if statements essentially work like a question. It will ask a question. If the question is true, then it will run the following code. If it's false, it won't. Or in other words, so if statements, like this. If statements simply work. So if you type in the word if, the program will realize you're trying to type an if statement. So you'll need parentheses. And this is the question you're going to be asking. And then this is the code that will run. So here is simply like, for example, if you want, you can say, for example, like the words if, let me move this. If age 1 is equal to 15, and this is simply saying, if the number in the bucket age 1 is equal to 15, then you can do this code inside. Like you can say, in this case, age 1 is equal to 16. However, if age 1 is a different number inside, like it's 14, then this will not run and it will stay 14. It will not be transformed to 16. Essentially, if statements take in a question that is yes or no. And then and if it's yes, it'll do something. If it's no, it won't do it. You can also put something, you can put else at the end. And this basically just says, if this question is true, it'll run this. Otherwise, it will run this code. And this is, if this is true, this will run, else, otherwise, do this instead. That's what if statements are. Now I can, and the second, one piece of code that uses if statement. So with if statements, right? Now we have some way of identifying when to end the, some way of identifying how many people there are. So when we can do that is essentially when we have code, it'll keep taking in ints. But when the user types in something else, like say the word done, right? We can use an if statement to check whether or not their input is the word done or if it's a number. And if it's the word done, then we know that they finished typing in all the ages. And then we can simply, then we can stop the code there and then start calculating from there. So that's how we can use if statements. However, we still need some way to continually create ages. In order to do that, first of all, we need some way of storage. We can't keep creating ints because you can't, if you create a finite number of ints, then they could just simply give you an extra person and then you would no longer be able to fit them all. So the way we're going to fit a potentially infinite number of people is with an array list. This question is making my schedule wonky. No, it's fine. This question is technically a bit of answer, but yeah, no, okay. So first of all, yeah. So if you want, yeah. So in order to do it, you need some way of storage, and we're going to do that by doing an array list. And this essentially is a list. Actually, no. Yeah. Why? Okay, so one way we can do it is like this. We can first do this. So firstly, there's no way for the program to just be able to know how many people there are. The user has to tell the program something to how many people there are, whether it's the aforementioned typing in done to signify when it's ended, or we can use this method where the program simply asks the person how many people are there. And so once you ask this, you can simply do int number of people is going to be equal to the next int that pops up. Now, in order to actually fit it, we have to have some sort of storage for it. So to do that, we're going to introduce arrays. Arrays are simply this, and they can hold up to some number of data. You might notice that the way I wrote this is very similar to the way I wrote scanner and the way I defined a variable. And it works very similarly too. There's a bucket called array, and this bucket its type is of a list of integers. And this bucket can hold a list of integers. We create an order, and this bucket at first is empty, but we create a new list of integers. This list has a length called num, or in other words, it can hold num objects. So if num is 10, it can hold 10 integers. Then after we create this list, we can put it in this empty bucket. And now array contains a list. Now we can start gathering data. And this time we're going to introduce hopefully the final thing, which is a for loop. For loops essentially it's just repetition. It repeats a process some number of times. So here what I'm doing is I create a for loop. This for loop creates an integer called I. And this, remember, and this bucket I has been, this bucket I was empty because it was just created, but we put a 0 in it. So now this I equals 0. Then, like I said before, and this part is similar to if statements. This is essentially yes or no question. The for statement will only ever do its do whatever it's supposed to do if I is less than num. And finally, this part simply says what to do after the for statement finishes one loop, I plus plus. And so essentially, what this essentially means is that if num is 10, for example, right, then I equals 0. Then every time this runs, it will increase I by 1 until I is 10. Once I equals 10, it's not smaller than 10. So then this will stop, and then I'll move on to whatever it's next. So in this case, what we can do is this, int age is equal to sc.next. And then, all right, next, not next, int, then array at I, h. So here is what's going to run every time this for statement loops. When I is equal to 0, it will first ask the user for an age. First ask the user for an age. Then it will create a bucket called age, create a new bucket called age, an empty one, and then take whatever the user typed and put it inside the bucket age. And then it will put this age into the list we created earlier. Now, this list has multiple spots, right? Essentially, the inside of the list will look something like this. Right? We have a list and it contains some objects. And if it's a number list, it'll usually initialize. When you create it, it'll put a 0 as a default value for everything, right? So this will initially look like this. When we write array I, what we're saying is the list at position I, replace it with whatever age is. So if age is 5, it'll replace at position I. If I is, for example, 3, then it goes to position 3 and replaces it with age. If age is 5 and I is 3, it will replace this number, position 3, with age. You might notice that this is in fact actually not the third number, but it's the fourth number. This is because in almost every language, all their lists start from 0. So this is the 0th position, then the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. This is why our list starts from 0 and goes up. This way, at the first thing they type in will go to the first element 0. And then it'll put the age in 0. And then when I++, I'll put age in I'll put the age in the position 1, then 2, then 3, all the way till now. All right. So someone asked, why does my code say cannot resolve symbol? One thing that, okay, so when it says cannot resolve symbol, it means you're trying to create something that you're trying to reference something that doesn't exist. That probably has to do with scope. I can't tell if you're seeing your code. So I either have to type it out and send it to me in the chat or like share your screen. But it might have to do with scope. Yeah. So now we have a list of ages. And I realize I could have made this easier. All right. Yeah, there's a way. There's a much easier way to do this. Right. So I ignore the list. Okay, yeah, I'm done. So if the original question doesn't actually care about things. Okay, so the original question I was asked was, given a random number of people, how to find their average age. And actually, it's really simple. So all you need is this int, right? And this int is going to represent the total ages, right? And then so we can repeat this process, but every time we have age, instead of putting in a list, we just add it to total. Or in other words, the bucket total now holds the item that's in total and the item in age. So after this finishes, we have the total number of people of ages, and num is also the number of people. So in order to find the average, we just have to do total divided by num. And that's simply how you do it. You don't need that array. Yeah. But well, that does actually make a good segue to everything else. So yeah, but lists are still incredibly useful because oftentimes you will need to hold a lot of data in a single area, and you can't infinitely create ints because like the program can't manually create its own variables. You have to actually type it out. So using arrays are one of the only ways you can actually create stuff with multiple like containers. All right. So that's how arrays work. They start from position, and you have to remember they always start from position 0. They don't start from 1. They start from 0. You have and then it goes to whatever the size of the list is -1. So if you ever want to put something in a list, you always remember the first element is not 1, it's 0, and the last element is not its size, but its size -1. Okay, so yeah, that's what ifs and fors are, and those are arrays. Now let's put those into practice. Can you how it, for example, okay, so let's say, for example, all right, so let's say someone wanted to create a program that can take in multiple numbers, and these numbers are prices of various objects. And then the program, any number of objects. So like, for example, they might want to buy 10 things or 8 things or 7 things. And then it wants to know what the average price of these items are and the total price, as well as the cheapest price and the most expensive item. So right now, we're gonna try to make a program that takes in any number of numbers. And then it can output the total, the average, the min value, and the max value. All right. All right. So now in order to do this, all right, hold on. All right, hold on. Someone had a question with their code. So, all right. So, okay, so this is someone else's code. So first of all, like I said yesterday, every statement needs a semicolon after. There's no semicolon, that doesn't work. And that's what tells Java to implement. And frankly, here's the big mistake here. The reason it says can I resolve symbol total is that total doesn't exist. Total must, first of all, have an int ahead of it. This int tells the program what total is. If you write it without the int, it doesn't know what total is supposed to be. Is total supposed to be a container that holds integers, a container that holds strings, a container that holds decimals? It doesn't know what it's supposed to be. The total could also even be an int array. You never define what total is. And secondly, total also, the second important thing is total must be defined outside of this for loop. If you define it inside the for loop, it doesn't work. And that's what's known as scope. Or essentially, items only exist inside of their respective brackets. So here, and what that basically means is, like I talked about earlier, Java has garbage collectors, which takes in whatever data you're not using and automatically deletes it for you, so you don't accidentally waste memory and create memory leaks. And one way it does that is by if you create something inside brackets, then it only exists inside this bracket. For example, this int age, I created an int age here, but if I try to use it, it doesn't exist because Java would have deleted it because it's outside of this bracket, of these brackets. However, if I put total outside in here, even if total is used inside the brackets, because it was created inside of these brackets, then it still exists on the outside. So I can still use it here. And this is known as scope, and essentially saying items only exist inside their respective brackets. And if you take it out, it doesn't no longer exists. Also, another thing to note is this line of code right here. This line of code creates a new bucket age every time you go through the for loop. So essentially, once you create this age bucket, and it goes to the end here, and then it comes back to the top and goes back to this piece of code, it replaces age. It deletes the original age and creates a new bucket age with ints. It's like that's how it works, like we talked about. So let's go back to the original. All right. So let's see if we can solve a question that looks like this. A program that can take in any number of amount of numbers. Specifically, our input is going to be, the first number is just how many numbers. So the first input is simply the total. And then each following input is a random number. Right? And then finally, we want to output the total or every number added together, the average value, the smallest value, and the maximum value. Now, let's start one by one. How would you find, first of all, how would you write your scanner? Any ideas? So how would you guys gather and how would you guys first of all solve the first part of the program specifically? Remember, so first of all, how would we go about doing step one? How would we taking all the input and store it so that we can use it? How do we solve the step? How do we solve step one? Yeah, we use scanner, but like, how would you write it out? How would you use scanner to get these two inputs? A total number and then all of the following other random numbers. So okay, so like we talked about earlier, first of all, for the very first number, we know what the first number is total. So you can simply do int total is equal to sc.next int. So the scanner, remember, so the way scanner works is that it takes in a list, and this list is essentially every user input. And it depends on how you put an input, but usually this list starts out empty. But when you type things in, it will add to this list. Every time you call scanner, every time you use scanners, one of scanner's methods, like next int or next, it takes, and the way it works is you use the scanner object. You have to use the name of the scanner, SC, or whatever you named it. And then you have to use either next or next int. And what that does is simply tell the scanner, give me the next object in that list. And then I'm going to take that object, output it here so that I can put it inside this total, and then removes that object from the list. So that way I'll go to the next user input. So another here, it takes in the list of input, takes the first one, which is total, and puts it inside a bucket that holds integers that we have called total. Then in order to take in every other number after that, we can create an array that has a size of total because it can hold total numbers, and then create a for loop because we want to get every number. So we'll have to repeat the input process some number of times. Remember, for loops are for the entire purpose of a for loop is simply to repeat a process multiple times. It repeats the same code multiple times. The reason it can give out different numbers is, in this case, thanks to user input. Every time it runs through each loop, it looks at the next user input, but since the user input might not be the same, it'll get out a different number every time. So in order to do it, we create a bucket we can call temporary because it will only exist inside this for loop. And every time this for loop runs, it's going to get replaced. Put whatever the next number is. Then we can put it in the correct position in the array. So now we have all the numbers and we have the total number of numbers after this is finished running. Now let's try it. So that's how you would do input. Of course, if you wanted to, you could not use the array at all. And while you do this, you could also just do all your operations here as well. But that's generally not a good practice because you don't want to like clutter everything together. That would save space and a bit of time, but for right now, we want readability and like usability rather than just speed. So we're gonna do it like this. So to reiterate, to do input, you need a scanner that takes in the user input down here. Then to get the first number, because in this I told you already, the specific input is going to be the first number is always going to be the total, and every single other number is going to be a random number up to and there's going to be exactly total numbers. So if total is 10, there'll be exactly 10 random numbers after it. So since we know there's going to be 10 numbers, we can do a for loop that will run 10 times because this will run from 0 to total, and I will add 1 to itself every time. So from 0 to 10, I will add to itself 10 times. From 0 to 1 to 2, all the way to 9. And then once I add itself one more time, because 10 is equal to 10 and not less than 10, it will run the 11th time. So it'll run 10 times, which will give us 10 numbers. And then all 10 numbers can be stored inside the array. Now, so does everyone understand? if I created a second question that's somewhat similar to this, would you be able to answer it? All right. So now we can actually do stuff with this data that we just collected. So we can do another for loop because we want to go through each of the random numbers. We don't want to miss a single one because that number could have been the smallest number, the biggest number or something. We can use I again here, and the program doesn't call us out for naming two things i's. Because remember, I only exists inside of the bracket area here. So by doing this, and then we can also do this. What this does essentially, it goes through every element in an array and brings out one element at a time so we can look at it one by one. Remember, so this for loop does a repeat every time, and each time I will increase by 1. So which will give us a new number. So let's start for the scene. We need the operands we need. We need a total, an average, a min, and a max. So first of all, let's write that out. Oh, yeah, I need a different name for it though. It doesn't like multiple names. Now, there's a slight problem with having right here. We can define min and max here, but you'll have to be careful later on because the way we're going to find mins and maxes is with a function we discussed earlier, the if function. And so in order to find the minimum number and the max number, we simply go through each temp and use an if function. If this number is smaller than the minimum number we found already, then the minimum is now this number. This loop says we go through every element, and if the element at that position is smaller than this min, then we will set min to 10. This way, if we go through every single value, this will give us the minimum value. Except in one case, what if every number in this list is positive? Then it will output 0, even though 0 was not actually part of the list. So when assigning a value, like a default value to your variable, you have to make sure something like this doesn't happen. In order to fix this problem, what we could do is instead of setting min to 0, we set it to the first value in the list, or really any value. But we usually go for the first one because we always know the first element exists, since you can't have a list with the size of 0 or a negative size. Max will also have the same problem. If every single number in an array was negative, then it will output 0 as the maximum number, even though that doesn't appear. So we need to set these to some number in the list. This way, even if this was the smallest number, then congratulations. Then this will always return false, and it will just output the first element. And if this isn't the first element, then at some point there will be an element that is smaller than it. And because it's smaller, the min value get replaced with that smaller number. So how would you find a maximum number then? If this code is how we find a minimum number, how would you find a maximum number? Okay. I don't know what that question. So I see someone trying to use a question mark. While question marks can be used to. Okay, so the question mark is like a special symbol that is essentially if statement but shorter, but it's also like hard to write. So we're definitely not that. Okay, but yeah. So someone wrote if greater than max, max is not equal to temp, and this does work. First of all, max is the first element. So for the very first element of the list, this will be false because it's equal to itself. It's not larger, so I won't do anything. And if there's ever, and since remember, this temp will be equal to every number in the list. It will, at some point, no matter where in the list it is, this temp will have that value eventually. So if your list is 0, 1, 2, 3, temp will be 0, and 1, and 2, and 3. So temp will be every value. And if one of the values is larger than the first value, then this will be true, which means it can run whatever, the program can do whatever's inside here. And inside here is telling us, take the bucket max and replace whatever is inside the bucket with temp's value. And so now max changes. And so when we go through it again, this max value has changed. So when you do temp again, temp has to be greater than the new max value, not the old one. And if your list is in a range and increase or like 0, 1, 2, 3, then the first time we'll take 1 and compare it to 0, And so now max is 1. Then I'll take the next number, let's say 2, and compare it to 1. So now max is 2. And if the next value in the list is 3, 3 is greater than 2, so then I'll replace it like that. So now we can find the this is how we can find the minimum maximum value. Now, how would you find the total value with this for loop and this list? How would you get the total value? How would you change this number to equal to all numbers in this list combined? All right, so in order to do this, we simply do total answer is equal to total answer plus temp, and that's it. Like I said, like I showed you earlier with the other question about ages, the way this works is we take the bucket total answer. This equal sign tells us to replace it. In other words, total answer is now equal to a new number. This new number is this number here. It takes the value that used to be in total answer and the temp value answer together. So when we run it the first time, total answer is 0. So this becomes 0 plus the first item in the list. And let's say, for example, our list is just going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's assume this is our list, all right? So the first value in temp is the value at position 0 is temp. So array, we take the list here at position 0, the value is 1. So this is equal to 1. So the bucket temp, its value is now set to 1. So, and then we go all the way here, temp is 1, this is 0. So 0 plus 1 is 1. Run again, this bucket is now equal to itself, which is 1 plus temp. So the item at position 1, because this I will have increased because it's the second repetition, because it says a plus here. So the 1 plus 2, which is 3. Then repeat, I'll take this number 3, add this 3 to it, so now it's 6. I'll take this 6, add this 4 to it. And I'll take the 10 and add this 5 to it. And that will give us 15. How would you find the average value then? All right, but to find the average value, simply take, yes, well, no, not like that. You would take, first of all, we already said earlier, we're going to put it inside this bucket. So this bucket is going to equal to total divided Essentially, this is the total value, all combined, divided by the number. And that will give us this number. Yay. So now we can simply output it. How would you output all 4 of these? How would you output them all? In this case, support, you get 4 print statements. And you can simply print out each and every one of them. The min value, the max value, the total value, and the average. And if you want to make it clear to the user, you can write min So if we were to run this program, then this basically just says, computer, print out or write out the word min, semicolon space, and then add on tack on a number to the end. Write out the word max, semicolon space, tack on this number, write this out, and then put this number at the end, and then write this out. So if we were to run it, so first we put in the total number. Let's say there are 10, and let's say and we can put in random numbers. Let's say 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's not 6. Yeah. So here, as you can see, we're told the program works like this. It takes the first number. Okay, so the first input, the program says the user put is 10. And so it stores it in this bucket total. Then it creates a new bucket. Because this bucket can hold multiple numbers instead of just one. And this bucket has a length of 10. Then, because the program knows there are going to be exactly 10 numbers after that, we can do a for loop. And each time this for loop runs, it'll go, okay, so the next value at temp is the next user input. We're going to store in this bucket temp. And then take the value in the bucket temp and put it in the list. And so it repeats that for each number here. Finally, after that's the end, it creates these 4 buckets. Then it goes to each value in the list, or in other words, it simply goes to all these values again. And first, if this value is smaller than the minimum value, then obviously that's not the minimum value anymore. This new number is the minimum value. Or if this number is greater than this bucket, the maximum number, then we have to replace this maximum number with the new maximum number since it's bigger. Finally, for every time loop, we add this number to a different bucket that's supposed to hold the total value. So we simply add it. If you want, you just keep adding it to itself. Finally, for average, we have to be out of the loop. We cannot do it if we do it in the loop, and this would mean 10. If we put this inside the loop, then that would be telling the program, repeat 10 times this division. In other words, it would take total answer and divide it by 10 times. And that is definitely not what the average value would be. So we have to do it outside of the for loop. Finally, the program simply prints out everything. So as you can see here, this is the basic, some of the most basic stuff. Input, user input, store that input so you can use it. Do stuff based on that input, and finally output something. By doing this, you can essentially create a program. And now you can actually create, like with stuff like this, it's actually now possible for you guys to create stuff like rock, paper, scissors, or rock, paper, scissors, even something basic like tic-tac-toe. Rock, paper, scissors, what you simply do is you would simply, for example, put down, if you want to play 3 rounds, you simply put down a for loop. That's, you simply put down a for loop that would repeat, like say 3 times to do 3 rounds. Each time you would ask the 2 players to type out whatever their rock, paper, scissors thing is, right? They would type in rock, paper, scissors. Also, okay, so arrays can store, this specific array can only store ints because it says ints here. If you want to store words, you would have to write the code for a word, which is string. If you write string array, And this system simply says this bucket array now holds string values. It works the same way for normal variables. If this bucket holds numbers because we told the program to hold numbers. If you didn't want to hold number, if you want to hold something else, you would put strings. So yeah, if you wanted, so now you can create like rock, paper, scissors game. And to do that, like I said earlier, before I was interrupted by the question, you could create a for loop. You repeat 3 times, right? So you would simply just write like 3 here. Or if you want to do a different number of times, you could ask the user how many times you want to run it. Put that in a bucket and simply run the for loop that many times. And each time for loop runs, you ask each user what their choice is. One way to do it is you can just have them type a number where 1 is rock, 2 is scissors, and 3 is paper, or you can tell them to type out the actual name of the thing they're using. Then you would use an if statement, right? If, for example, and then you would simply write if user 1 is rock, user 2 is scissors, print user 1 wins. And you would have to repeat that if statement for each possible case. And after that, the output would simply be something along the lines of user 1 wins like 8 rounds or something. So I want you guys to try and see if you can code a basic rock, paper, scissors program using what I just said. I'll put this video and the notes onto the Google Classroom as well. And I'll create a new assignment for that as well. And remember, you can always message me through the Google Classroom, through the comments on below the thing if you need help with that. But yeah. And that is unfortunately the end of our class. See you guys next time. And if anyone has any questions, you can stay behind. And don't worry about the questions. The questions are actually nice. It's just I was not prepared for those because those are really good questions. You're teaching in the. It just happens that those questions, those questions are actually nice. It's just since most of you don't know the code, it takes a bit to explain them. But those questions are actually really good. Yeah. See you guys next time.
Wait, is there supposed to be a class after this?
No, this class is from 5 to 6.
My mom told me the class started at 6.
Oh, well, what you can do is I recorded it, so you can just watch it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just watch it.
Do you have the Google Classroom link?
Yeah, I'm
all right, I'll put it there. It'll probably take me a couple minutes to upload to YouTube.
Okay.
But once I finish, you can just watch it on there.
All right.
So I'll probably wait till 6:20, I think, and it should be up there. If it's not, it's still uploading. So you'll
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. But it should be from 5 to 6. If it changes, I'll let you guys know in the chat, but it should be from 5 to 6.
I don't know. My mom told me it was at 6.
Yeah. Well, everyone else, is here already. So yeah, that sucks a bit, but